Tukra is an 8-track trigger sequencer for Eurorack with integrated drum synths and sample players, effects, advanced generative possibilities, MIDI integration, a USB host port, and more. It uses a striking button grid with RGB LEDs as the main user interface, with every function immediately accessible via a dedicated function button. It has great integration with larger systems via USB, MIDI, gates and CVs, but it's also a powerful all-in-one solution for rhythmic composition and performance. When you first turn it on, you can start making beats immediately, since it boots up with a basic drum kit already loaded. Just press play and start pushing buttons on the grid to create an 8-step sequence. Each row is a channel, so 1 and 2 are kicks, 3 and 4 are snares, and so on, so on. You can change the tempo by pushing the tempo button, then turning the encoder. If you hold Shift and press the tempo button, you can now use the encoder to add swing to your beat. You can randomize tracks by holding the Randomize button and pressing the number button for your chosen track. If you don't like that, you can clear them all by holding Shift and the Randomize, and then sliding your finger down the entire numbers column. In fact, this is a cool thing about the user interface here. The buttons are very soft and easy to press, so you can even program a beat by just sliding your finger over like that, see? Now if you like what you did, you can save it by holding the function key and pressing the save button on the top right. Then choose a slot to save on. I already have quite a few saved here. I'm going to choose this one. And then it goes right back to your program page. Alright, let's stop it. You can save up to 64 projects on the SD card. Each project can contain up to 16 songs. Here are the songs. They're indicated by a full square of LEDs rather than just a single button. Each song can be made up of 64 parts, and each part can contain up to 64 patterns. Here are the patterns. And each pattern contains 8 tracks, which can be individually set to lengths of up to 64 steps, each with its own play mode and clock division settings. Let's talk a bit about the panel layout. On the top left you have a push button encoder. Under it are the 2 columns of white buttons, which are the main function buttons. To the right are the 64 black buttons of the 8x8 grid, each with a glyph or icon to the right and a multicolor LED above. To the right of the grid there's a column with 4 illuminated pots and 4 auxiliary LEDs. And then all of the jacks for the inputs and outputs. On the top, there's a USB host port for use with an external controller. The encoder has 2 modes of operation, which you can cycle through by pushing it. The main mode behavior will change depending on what page or parameter you are editing. And the other one is track selection mode. You can tell you're in the track selection mode when the LEDs in the last column turn off except for one, lit in pink, indicating the selected track. Turning the encoder changes your track selection. Some parameters like step, gate and roll, for example, can be set by turning the encoder or clicking the grid, while others are set only by using the encoder, such as tempo and swing amount. Some of these parameters can be displayed using the grid as a low-resolution display if you press Multiselect. For example, tempo. If I hold Multiselect, we can see our tempo right there. 109. Turning the encoder will change that tempo, and you can see that change reflected immediately. Some parameters that can be visualized this way are tempo, swing, length, and MIDI velocity. The button grid is used mainly for editing steps, but it also gives you access to a number of functions and views when combined with the function button, the second from the bottom left, right above Shift. The first column of the grid is used in combination with the edit buttons to select, copy, paste, randomize, or clear certain track parameters. Let's call it the numbers column. The grid functions are organized in rows of related functions. Tukra's 4 potentiometers adjust the offset for each of the 4 CV inputs. When nothing is plugged in the CV jacks, they work as manual modulation controls. If a signal is connected to a CV input, its pot will set the input voltage range. So set it counterclockwise for a voltage range of 0 volts to plus 10 volts. Put in the center for a voltage range from minus 5 volts to plus 5 volts. And clockwise for minus 10 volts to 0 volts. Any voltages that exceed these limits will be trimmed or ignored. So for example, if you want to use an envelope, turn the potentiometer counterclockwise, and if you want to use an LFO, set it to its center position. This column of LEDs is also meant to give you feedback. By default, the translucent shaft of the 4 pots displays the incoming CV with colors, from green, which is negative, through yellow and orange to red, which is positive. A blue blinking LED is seen on the relevant row when settings, live, drum, or mix views are selected. Additionally to the 4 CV inputs, Tukra has clock, reset, and TRS MIDI inputs, all labeled in gold over the black panel. The outputs include 8 gate outputs as well as clock, reset, and TRS MIDI, and audio left and right outputs. These are labeled in black over gold. If you need more audio outputs, look into acquiring the TEO Expander module. The TRS input uses Jim Matheson's circuit, therefore accepting both pinout standards, the Korg Make Noise one as well as the Arturia Novation one. Now let's dive into the main function buttons. The ones on the left column are editing tools and actions: tempo, zoom, randomize, copy paste, multi-select, function, and shift. The right column houses edit modes and views: home, gate, row, step value, track settings, performance mode, drum synth, and audio mixer. All of them take on additional roles when used in conjunction with the shift or function buttons. This is the play stop button. Pressing this button will start playing the sequence from the beginning and will set the clock source to internal. Let's quickly program a beat here. Pressing the button again will stop. And if I hold shift and press play, it'll continue from where it stopped. See, this is the playhead over here. I'm holding shift, I press play now, and it'll continue from right there. If I hold function and press play, that'll reset the sequence at the next step. It's cool to do sort of turntablism kind of fills and things like that. Again, this is the tempo button. Pressing it will let you change the tempo, right? Holding multi-select will let you visualize that tempo. The minimum value for the tempo is 10 beats per minute and maximum is 300 beats per minute. Shift and the metronome button give us the shuffle or swing amount. This makes the even 16th notes longer and the odd ones shorter proportionally. Even using an external clock source, Tukra can generate a swing grid from the straight MIDI or trigger clock inputs. And again, pressing multi-select will display our swing amount, which goes from 0 to 100. Holding function and pressing the metronome will half the tempo. This will divide the tempo by 2, and the division will take effect on the next 4th step, just to keep things sort of in line. The behavior of this function differs a little if the clock source is internal or external or MIDI. With the internal clock, the tempo can be divided as long as the tempo is larger than 20 beats per minute. With the external clock sources, MIDI or clock input, the tempo could be divided up to 2 times only to preserve a solid behavior of the microgrid and the rolls. Now if I hold shift and function and press the metronome, this will double the tempo. So this will multiply the tempo by 2, and as before, this will take effect on the next 4th step. The This function will only be effective if the clock source is internal or if the tempo has been previously divided by 2. Note that both half and double tempo also have the limitation of the maximum and minimum BPM settings allowed by Tukra. Now let's have a look at the zoom button. Clicking on this button will pass through the different zoom levels. The first one is just a row for every track. Then you get 2 rows for every track. We can only see 4 playheads now. If I press it again, we'll see 4 rows for every track. So that allows us to see up to 32 steps at once for a single track, right? Now our pattern only has 8 steps. We'll learn how to set different lengths for your pattern in a little bit. If I press the zoom button again, the whole screen displays a single track. So you can program a 64-step pattern for a single instrument without having to switch pages or anything like that. You see the entire 64 steps on the grid at once. Now, when you're on this page and you want to change the tracks, the way to do that is to press the encoder and use it to select which track you want to edit. And the track number is indicated on the grid as if it were a display once again. Let's go back to the first zoom level, which is no zoom at all. You can see all 8 tracks, but only 8 steps per track. Now, holding Shift and pressing the magnifier here, which is our zoom, that toggles the follow function on and off. So when follow is deactivated, the grid will always show the same section of the pattern instead of following the playback pointer, which is handy when you're editing a pattern that's longer than 8 steps while playing it. But you can also toggle the follow on so that you can visualize what's happening to the pattern as it plays. So for example, I'm going to jump ahead and show you how to change the length here. We'll go to a zoom level of 2 so we can do 16 step sequences. If I hold Shift and press the 16th step on the first channel here, it'll do it to all the channels. So in this view, Shift allows you to change simultaneously the length of all of the tracks. So now if we go back to zoom level 1 and press play, as you see, follow is disabled, so we're still looking at the first page. But if I hold now Shift and the magnifier, now it'll display the following page. When you hold function and press zoom, the encoder will make the play position step 1 by 1 forward and backwards. This is the shuttle behavior. This behavior for the encoder won't work while Tukra is playing, of course, right? So as you can see, right now I turn the encoder and nothing happens. But if I hold function and press the magnifier, press the zoom key, now I can use the encoder to step through all of the individual steps one by one, which can be very handy for certain of the edit modes. The Randomize button, pressing this button plus any one of the numbers buttons on the numbers column will randomize the chosen track in the current pattern. And the parameter that you're randomizing will depend on which edit mode that you're in. So right now we're in the home screen, which is the step edit mode. So if I hold randomize and press any of these, it'll randomize a pattern, create a random pattern for all of these tracks. And I can keep doing that as many times as I want, and it'll continue to create random patterns. The parameters that can be randomized in this way are step, step probability, gate, gate probability, row, row probability, step value, play mode, length, clock divider, Euclidean number, drum synth settings, and audio mixer settings. So quite a few. Shift plus randomize actually is initialize or clear. So using this combination of buttons and then clicking on any of the numbers column will initialize or clear the parameters for that track. This function is currently available for the following views: steps, row, gate, probabilities, step value, length, track settings, mixer, drums, and patterns. In patterns, this function will initialize all tracks and all parameters, clearing the pattern. In fact, let's do that right now. I'll go into our pattern view here. We only have one pattern in this project right now. So if I hold Shift and randomize and click that, now that pattern has been cleared. And there you go. A clean pattern once again. This icon over here, that's copy and paste. So pressing this button plus any button from the numbers column will select the track to be copied. Once that track is selected, all of the LEDs from the pots column will blink in orange. So let's first load up pattern here. I'm going to load up this guy. And we'll come back home. This is what that pattern sounds like. Right? Now let's say I want to copy from track number 5 here over to track number 8. If I hold copy paste and click on number 5, you can see the LEDs blinking. That indicates that the clipboard is now full. And now I press number 8, it'll paste the contents of the clipboard onto track 8 over here. And this will also empty the clipboard. Now we haven't gotten to the modulation matrix yet, but I will mention that in the modulation matrix, each single point can be copied and pasted. In the modulation matrix, if you want to copy all of the 7 settings points that each track has, you can just use copy and paste and the numbers column, like we just did for the pattern. If you need to empty the clipboard without pasting its contents, you can just press Shift and click on the copy button. That empties the clipboard. This copy and paste functionality will work with step, step probability, gate, gate probability, row, row probability, step value, play mode, length, clock divider, Euclidean number, drum synth settings, audio mixer settings, modulation matrix settings, track settings, patterns, parts, and songs. In parts and songs, the behavior of this button differs a little. It will directly paste the active part or song. We'll get to that when we go into patterns, parts, and songs. This is the Multiselect tool, also the display value button. So you use this tool to select several steps within a track. All edits and modifications that you apply will then be performed to those selected steps. The tool also works as a display value for several parameters such as tempo, swing amount, length, clock divider, sample selection, MIDI note, MIDI velocity, and MIDI channel. This is the function key. You've probably already realized by now. This one allows you to access the respective functions of the buttons on the grid. You can also use it to select a track. So if you just press it and click on the numbers column, it'll select. But the main function is by holding it to access any of the functions indicated by the icons to the left of each button. So for example, this is the sample selection. This is the length. This is the divider. This is the output filter, and so on. The last of this row is the Shift key. As with any Shift key, it doesn't do anything by itself, but provides additional functionality to the other buttons clicked while this is pressed. We've already seen some of these Shift functions. Now let's move over to the second wide column here. The top button is the Home or Step Edit button. This is the main view of the sequencer where the steps are edited to build your pattern. Also, this button will work as a back. So a first click of this button will take you to the previous edit mode or view, and a second click will take you to the step editor. So for example, if I'm here in the parameters view, and then from there I go to performance mode, pressing Home will bring me back to the parameters view. And then pressing it again will bring me to the step edit page. In this view, the playback pointer is indicated by the red dots, right? You can consider that the playhead. The active steps are lit in blue. The position of the encoder is indicated with a blinking green LED, like you see right here. You can turn steps on and off not only in this view, you can actually add or delete them in many other views by using Shift in conjunction with the grid button. All of the step views except for the row, triplets, and live view allow for this. So for example, if I'm here in the gates view, right? Here I can't really turn on a step, see? It just blinks green showing that it's selected. But if I hold Shift, then I have activated that step without having to go back to the step edit page. Now if I'm back in the home page here, if I hold Shift and click on the button grid, I can open the Microgrid view where the steps are expanded to 6 micro steps. See? You have these 6 steps here representing that single step in the main view. I can actually remove the first one and move it a little bit like that, and that'll create a slight delay. See how that snare is kind of flammed? It's a little bit delayed. Or I can even program a little roll. Holding Shift and the Home button takes you to the step probability page. You can set probability from 1 to 10 on any step that you select. 1 being the minimum, the step will never be played, and 10 the maximum, which means it'll always play. In this view, the probability is displayed with colors, red for maximum and blue for minimum. So if I choose this one and turn the encoder, now I've turned that probability to minimum. That means that note will never happen. And as I turn it, it gets more purple and then more pink and then it's red. That means it will always happen, right? And there are only 10 steps to choose here. So for example, that very one will make it like purple, so kind of probable. Let's hear it. There it goes. It's happened twice in a row and then not for a while. So this is a really cool way to add some excitement to your beats, to add some variety without you having to be inputting that variety in real time all the time. You just create probability for different steps. Holding Shift and moving the encoder will offset the probability values on all the steps on that particular track and pattern, not just the selected ones. So I've selected this one here, so now if I hold Shift and turn the encoder, that's gonna make all of the steps on that track change probability, right? Also, here's where you can use the Multiselect tool, for example. So I can choose a few different steps on the same track, right? So I've chosen these 3 but not this one, and now I can turn the encoder and affect all 3 of my selected steps, but not the one that's not selected. Now you might be asking, what's the deal with probability of 0? Because if the step never plays, then isn't that the same thing as having the step off, right? Just know that there's a function called sculpt that we'll look at a little later. This adds offset to the step probability. So increasing it will bring to life all the dead steps with a probability of 0, increasing the density of the rhythmic pattern. This is the gates page. To generate a gate instead of a trigger, you can click on an active step. This step will be used as the open the gate, and then the next active step, which is this one, will close it and won't be played. So this will be like the MIDI note off message, right? Note on, note off. So let's listen to that. So let me add this step right here. See how this double snare here? If I go back to the gates page and choose this one, then what it's doing is a gate that goes from here to here. So you don't hear this as a separate step anymore. This one becomes the close gate information, right? This can be particularly useful when you're using the gate output here to trigger an envelope that has sustain, for example. So you can actually create long notes and vary the length of those notes using the gates page. The gate will affect the trigger outs and the MIDI out notes, but has no effect in the internal drum synth or sample player because those are one shot. The only thing is that the micro step or the step used to close the gate will not be played. Again, the playback pointers are red dots, the playhead, right? Active steps are blue dots and steps with gates are orange ones, right? So that's set a gate here. So this one, for example, this means that this gate will last for 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, and it will turn off at that one. See? Turn it on, it won't trigger this hi-hat here. Turn it off and it will trigger again. Now holding Shift and then pushing the gate button takes you to the gate probability page. On this page, each gate step has a probability value ranging from 1 to 10. The default value is 10. Click on a step and use the encoder to modify its value. Right? So let's go back to gate first. We'll set this one as a gate. Now we had shift and gate. This is probability. We can choose this and turn the encoder, and this will modify the probability of that gate happening. So let's play the pattern here. See? So sometimes we're hearing this hi-hat on this spot here, and sometimes we're not. When we don't, that's because gate has been engaged, and that varies according to the probability that we've set for that step. Again, I can use shift and change the values on all the gates that are active in that step, and I can use multi-select as well. The color code is red for the maximum value and blue for minimum. That's going to carry over for most modes. This is the row page. In this view, a row or ratchet can be activated for each step. Click on any active step or turn the encoder to place a row there. Let's do a little snare row here. Now remember, we can always add notes by holding shift, right? So if I'm programming a row and I want to roll the kick here, I can first hold shift and press the button to add that note, and then press it again to add a roll to it. And there you go. Now let's say you want this row to be permanent, to be burned into the pattern, so that if you change the default row, it won't change that particular row, right? What you can do is press shift and click on it. So this row has now been burnt into the microgrid of that step, and it won't change. Even if you go and change the row type, that particular row will stay as it is. So that means you can have various different row types in your pattern. All you have to do is change the row type, program it in, and then burn it in by using the shift click function. Again, you might be beginning to see a pattern here. By holding shift and pressing row, we go into the row probability page, right? And same as all the other probability pages, you set a value from 1 to 10 for each step that has a roll on it, and that will determine the probability of that row happening. The default value is 10. Click on a step, use the encoder to modify its value or the value of the selected steps. Same as with the other ones, if you hold shift, you can change the probability of all the rolls on that track. And selecting multiples with multi-select also allows you to change all those values simultaneously. Now let's say you're in the row page here. Let's set some rows. You can change the row type by holding function and pressing the rows icon and then turning the encoder. And there are 3 types of rows. This one, this one, and this one. Very cool. The next button is the step value button. This allows you to assign a value from 0 to 127 to each one of your steps, to any one of your steps. This parameter is used by default to set the velocity of the MIDI notes, but it can also be used as a modulation source for any modulatable parameter in Tukra for any track. You can use this value to set the pitch of the MIDI notes and the drum synth, to set the sample selection or the step length. In this view, the color of the steps will go from blue, which is 0, all the way through purple to red, which is 127. Now, to make this more clear, only the active steps will display any color at all, but all steps have a step value, which will be used if they're modulating the parameters of other tracks. In order to display these, you press multi-select. See, now you can see every single step, even the ones that are inactive, because as has been said, you can use them to modulate parameters of other tracks, and we'll see how to do that later. So to adjust a value, click on the desired point of the grid and use the encoder. To display all the values, press Multiselect. To select several steps of the same track, press Multiselect and click on the grid to add steps. Right there, and we can move all of these at once. Now if I want to modify all of the steps on the same track, all I have to do is press Shift while using the encoder. Now here's another cool feature. If you want to make a ramp of values going from 0 to 127 or vice versa, you can hold 2 points of the grid and use the encoder. So from here to here, as we can see now, these lights are going from a purple to a red. If I go counterclockwise, it goes the other way around, from red to blue, see? This can be really interesting to use for velocity. For example, you can do fills that way. Now, to randomize all step values in a track, press Randomize and any of the numbers, right? To initialize all step values in a track, press Shift and Randomize, and that'll set them all back to the middle position, to their default position. Now here's where you can use the copy and paste to copy just a single step value to any other step. So, for example, let's say I want this value to go to here. There you go. Now they're the same color, see? I can also copy all step values in a track. So I can just hold Shift and copy all of these values on this track and then paste them on this track. Now there's also a columns view of the step value. A few of these pages offer column views and we'll see about them. But let's just look at this one. So I'll hold a function. So hold function and press the step value key. This is another view to edit the step value. In this one, only the values of the selected track will be displayed in columns. The ones corresponding to an active step are highlighted. Step values can be edited by clicking on the grid. See, like that. Right? Or using the encoder. You can see that reflected on the lights for this particular column, right? Now pressing Shift while moving the encoder will modify all step values in the track, not just the selected ones. Hold Shift. See, now we've raised the step value for all steps on that track. And now we're lowering them all together by holding Shift. To be clear, a first click will select the step and the second click will set a step value. So you have 15, 31, 47, 63, 79, 95, 111, and 127. Now there's another version of this view that you can switch to by clicking on the zoom icon when you're in this edit mode. So here we go. I just clicked on zoom. It's pretty similar, but it's vertically zoomed. So each dot on the column represents increments in the step value of 1. So this gives you a much finer control over the step value. This becomes really handy when the step value is holding the MIDI note, for example, or the sample selection or a clock divider directly, because it allows a precise edit of the step value using the button grid. Use encoder for vertical scrolling when you're in this mode, right? So the encoder gives you a vertical view, a vertical scrolling. Since now you have much higher resolution, you can't see the entire thing on just a single screen. So that's what the encoder is for on this view. Now holding Shift and the step value button opens up a page called Pattern Parameters Modulation. This is the key combination to activate the view of the modulation matrix for pattern parameters. And we'll talk about the modulation matrices in a little while. It's a little bit more advanced feature. Okay, now let's have a look at the honeycomb icon over here. That's the track settings view, where you can adjust several track configurations which are shared within the same song, except for the last column, which has pattern track parameters. These settings can be changed on the fly without artifacts, so it could be used, for example, to switch on and off some extra layers of the drum sounds during a performance. You can see what each column does over here. This is drum synth, this is the sample player, this is sample select, This is MIDI note on and off. This is default MIDI velocity, sample pitch, and this is master track and choke. Now let's look at each thing one at a time. I'm going to play a pattern here. Now this is the sample player column, right? I've just disabled the sample players and now we don't hear anything. This one is the drum synth. See, I've just enabled all of the drum synths on all my 8 tracks. Right now they're not set to anything particular, so they're sounding kind of strange, but we'll get to the drum synth page where we can make adjustments to each individual drum synth, one per track. Now, let's just listen to this one drum synth over here. If I hold shift, I can change the waveform of the drum synth. See? So most things in the drum synth you will adjust in the drum synth page, but the waveform selection is actually done right here. Right? And the current options are sine, triangle, saw, and square. Okay, and they change colors to indicate that. Alright, so let's leave this one in sine. We'll turn it off. Enable the sample player, right? Now, if I hold shift and press any one of these buttons on this row, I will toggle the user sample player, right? And right now I have some Tycho samples loaded up in there, and we're triggering the same sample with all of my channels right now, right? So if I hold shift, user, let go of shift, factory, right? Now I can select the samples on this row over here. So for example, right now we have this kit. If I click on the sample select button for track 1 here, I can now use my encoder to cycle through different ones, right? And the color of the LED here will reflect the change in sample selection. See? You can hear the whole groove. So we can make these changes in context. That's a good one, right there. Now, if the Tukra is stopped and I choose sample select over here, just turning the encoder will let you hear the new samples. So that can be really handy too. Like this is a really good kick right here. This is a snare, right? So here we can choose a different snare. There you go. Now here's another cool thing. If I select this and hold shift, moving the encoder will surf the samples within the same category. So this will focus on snare-like sounds. It makes it much easier to find the sound you want. That's a good one right there. Might have been the original actually. The fourth column over here, that's MIDI note. This column sets the pitch of the MIDI note generated by the track. The lowest value being 0, which is displayed in a light green color. And the highest is 127, which is red. This option has no effect if the step value to MIDI note function is active. All you have to do is click here and turn the encoder, and you can see that color changing, right, from green to red, and that will reflect the MIDI note that's being output. If I hold Multiselect, it will display that actual MIDI note number, right? So I can actually see which number I'm assigning that particular track to. This is handy if you're using MIDI to trigger an external drum machine where a particular MIDI note triggers a particular sound that you want. Let's go back to green here. If I hold Shift and press on any of these, I will turn them off, which can also be handy as a selective mute, right? Like maybe I have all three. I have the drum synth going, I have the sample player going, and I have MIDI notes going. I can mute just the MIDI notes by holding Shift and pressing any of these buttons or all of them. The next column over here is MIDI velocity. If I click on any button on this column, I can set the default MIDI velocity for any of the tracks. By the way, this setting will do nothing if the step value to MIDI velocity setting is active. And over here, we have sample pitch. Currently, this only works for the user library of sounds. It can be really handy. You can sample maybe a bass note, for example, load it up into the SD card, and then use this column to set the pitch. You can fine-tune your kick drum or your snare drum or whatnot. Let's try that. So I'm going to change this to user. Right? Let's just leave one active here to make it easy. Click on that, and now turning the encoder changes the pitch of that sample. It's a Tyco rim hit, I think. These samples can be adjusted from -4 octaves all the way to +3 octaves, so it's pretty wide ranging, and you can get some really gnarly lo-fi sounds that way. By the way, if I press the honeycomb here, the track settings button, a second time, that'll take us to the step value 2 view. And here you can assign the individual step values per track to certain parameters. So the first column after the numbers column, you would be sending step value to drum pitch. Second one is inactive, which is why it's set purple like this. The third one is step value to sample select, which can be really cool, because then you can have different sounds on the same track. If you're careful about programming that, you can do a whole beat on a single track. On the fifth column, you can assign step value to MIDI note. On this one, you can assign step value to MIDI velocity. On this one, you can assign step value to sample pitch. This only affects the user bank. And the last column, you can assign step value to clock division. Now, holding Shift and the settings button takes you to Triplet Mode. The Tukra's time grid can be set in triplets, in sections of 4 steps. This setting will affect all the tracks, and when it's active, the last step of those 4 will be ignored. So that way you get a triplet division. You lose 1 out of every 4 and you get these triplets. To set the grid to triplets, click on the triplet icon and click on the area you'd like to convert. That will be highlighted in green color. So for example, hold here and I can choose this area over here, and that'll become triplety. Hear that? This is very cool because you couldn't really do that by programming in steps. It's actually a polyrhythm, a bit of a polyrhythm going on there. If I press on there again, it goes back to a 4-based time division. Note that when using triplets, the swing parameter won't have any effect in the triplet sections. And the triplet parameter will affect all of the tracks, right? So here, why don't we do the whole first 8 steps triplety. And you can see that it's highlighted in green when triplet is engaged. And I can turn it off in play too, on and off. Now it's all triplets, see? And we're back. So basically each fourth step will be ignored and the 3 will be stretched out to fill the same amount of time. Swing amount will not apply. Now, if I hold function and press triplet, this is the force triplet function. It turns the whole pattern into triplets. And then I can get out of it, performing the same button combination again. This could be really cool in live performance. You can suddenly go into a different field for a little while and come back. Nice. And let me point out that when you are in the honeycomb over here, you get this little blue flashing LED to indicate that these are the parameters that you will be adjusting or editing. The little heart shape over here, this is called the live or performance actions. Clicking on it brings up the live view. This allows you to perform several actions to any of the tracks without having to switch between views and modes. This way you can mute a track, reverse the play direction of another, etc. Every row represents a track and every column represents an action. The actions are displayed in these icons over here. Again, the little blue LED on the right side indicates that this is the row that's active. And what we have here is on the first column, you can solo, right? So I can solo just a kick drum there, for example, and add the snare. See? So that first column here becomes solo buttons. The second one becomes mutes. See? And when you mute a track, you can see it highlighted in orange. Right? Any muted tracks will be highlighted in orange. That makes it easier to see which ones are muted so you don't get confused. The third one is fill. So all the steps will be on when you press this button, even if the track is muted. And you can do this simultaneously, right? The fourth column is rows. So this will perform a row that you can set to different default rows. It's a little different than fill. Fill just fills out the steps. But a row actually goes into the micro steps and you can set different kinds of rows. All right, that's very cool. Now number 5 inverts the pattern. And what that means is that steps that are off will go on and steps that are on will turn off. So let's do that to the kick drum, for example. We can do that to the snare. This page is awesome to create lots of variety during performance. The next one will reverse the play direction. So as you see, the cursor is moving forward, right? The playhead is moving forward on all tracks. But if I invert any of them, you can start to see the playheads going in different directions now. That can make quite a bit of a difference in your pattern. Make them go forward again by just pressing the buttons on here. Now, as we can see, playing around here, we have changed the synchronicity of the tracks. So remember that you can always hold function and play, and that'll reset. So now our pattern is back to its original position. The playheads all aligned. And the last two rotate the patterns. The first one will shift it to the left, right? So I've just shifted my kick drum pattern to the left. One more. This can make quite a difference as well. And then the last row rotates to the right. So now we're back to the original position. And you can keep going until it cycles all the way through. And we can reset again. Note that the fill and row are latch functions, so they'll be active only while the corresponding button is pressed, while the other functions are toggle functions. So this fill is only active while I'm holding down the button. When I let go, let's go. Same with the row. But if I invert it, that's a toggle function. Toggle on and then toggle off again. Now holding Shift and pressing the heart icon, that opens up the track settings modulation page. And right now you can only modulate sample selection and sample pitch on this page, which are the two rows that are not whited out. See, these are whited out, means they're not active, can't do anything. But we'll get into all the modulation matrices a little bit later. So let's move on to the drums page. That's the drum icon over here, next to the last white button. And what we get here is similar to the mixer, which we'll see next. Basically, you have your track select over here. In both the drum page and the mixer, you can hold Multiselect and press any number in the numbers column to solo that track, which can be very handy when you're making adjustments. This is the drum level. This is drum decay. This is drum pitch, fourth column here. Here's pitch envelope, sample level, noise level, and here's a decay envelope for just the sample and noise, right? So if we go to the settings page here and we turn on all of the drum synths and we turn on all of the samples, we can now go over here. We can select track 1, for example. This is the pitch envelope, right? So from the bottom down, it's a inverted envelope. From the bottom up, it's a positive going envelope, and I can make fine adjustments with the encoder, right? So you make your coarse adjustments with just the buttons here, and you can do the fine tuning with the encoder. See? You can bring the sample back up a little bit. Here's the noise level. Each track has a noise generator. And this is the decay for that noise. It's the same decay for both the noise and the sample. Let's bring the drum pitch down a little bit. There you go. So now we've fattened up that kick, right? Turn off the noise here. Turn the sample higher, louder. So this is just the sample. Give it more decay. This is the sample, and this is the sample with the drum synth added. I think it really makes it a fatter, punchy kick in this case. This is the decay envelope. But I think a shorter decay is better. What's nice is that you do get a separate amplitude decay and pitch envelope decay. And again, here's just the drum synth there. And you can do that for all 8 tracks. You can actually not use any samples and create your entire beat just using the drum synth portion. The noise can be hi-hat. You can add noise to an oscillation to get a sort of a snare drum. You can do kicks like this. You can do toms like this as well. Now, if I hold Shift and press the drums column, then you get the modulation matrix for the drum synth parameters. Note that if the step value to MIDI note option is active for a track, the pitch of the drum will be fixed to its step value and quantized. So the modulation settings for that parameter won't have any effect. Now, holding function and pressing the drum icon, that opens a page for the LR and TEO Expander configuration. Basically, this view sets which type of signal will be present in the left and right outputs and the extended outputs, the 6 ones included in the TEO Expander, which I don't have right now. The behavior of tracks and outs 1 to 6 differs a little from tracks 7 and 8, which go to the left and right outputs. When the audio out option is chosen, independent tracks will be present in the TEO outputs and an audio mix in the left and right outputs. Tracks 7 and 8 cannot be removed from the audio mix. The numbers column defines which drums will be removed from the left-right out, which only applies to tracks 1 through 6. So here, the drum icon, you have independent drum output for TEO and audio mix for left and right. Over here, you have envelope. The decay can be adjusted with the encoder. This option is selected. This is stepped CV, which is a pseudo volt per octave signal. Then this is the envelope modulated in amplitude by the step value and adjustable decay. Here's the LFO. This is the LFO with its amplitude modulated by the envelope with adjustable decay. And here's the envelope with decay modulated by the step value. There's a handy chart in the written manual you can look at for this. These are project settings, so they're the same for all songs within the project, and they're stored in the micro SD card. Moving on, let's go into the audio mixer. So the audio mixer, you have your track select buttons over here, right? And then you have volume over here. So right now I've turned down the volume of my kick drum, see? I can turn it back up, and once again I can use the encoder to make fine adjustments to any of these parameters. So once I've clicked on one of these columns, the encoder is now active for that adjustment. Right? This is the panning. I can make my kick drum come out of my right ear here, or my left ear here, or back in the middle. Now to go back to the middle, you have to use the encoder. And when you see the two purplish blue here, that means that it's centered. Now over here, remember you see the blinking blue LED in the last column, indicating that this is the active row of controls, right? I like the nifty little balance icon over here. It's a meditating person, so they're balanced. Nice. This is reverb over here, reverb send. There's actually reverb in the Tukra. So here's reverb in our kick drum. Again, any of these parameters can be edited with the encoder as well as with the buttons. So you can fine tune it, right? This over here is a filter cutoff frequency. We change to the snare here. And I can add resonance over here. I've got almost full resonance here. And we can find kind of a sweet spot for that snare between the cutoff and the resonance. There you go, that's pretty interesting. Maybe add some reverb to that. There you go. Now you can change the filter type. That's this next to last column over here. So that's band pass over here, high pass, band pass, or low pass. The crossfade between the filter types is smooth. It's not a discrete adjustment. Smoothly crossfades between low pass, band pass, and high pass. And here we have a bit crusher per track. See, this is maximum bit crushing for that snare sound. And again, I can fine tune it with my encoder here. So you get all these mixing parameters per track, and you select the track with the button over here. The selected track is indicated with a blue button in the numbers column. Now that does it for all of the white buttons. So now we're going to get into some function button and grid button combinations. We'll start with the mixer actually, because for example, let's say you want to adjust the volumes of all 8 tracks. You don't need to see the panning, you don't need to see the bit crusher, you just want to see all the volumes. So that's easy. You just hold the function key and press the volume icon over here, which are these 4 ascending rectangles. And now you have a volume page for all tracks, which you can actually even sort of draw on, see? And it gives you a very immediate adjustment of the volume for each one of your tracks, which is nice. The same goes for every single parameter in the mixer. So I can hold function, for example, and click on the meditating dude over here, and now I have panning per track. I can pan them all as I want, right? Still, the encoder works. I can centralize all of them if I want. There you go. You can choose maybe hi-hat a little bit to the side there. Same thing goes for a reverb. So function and the cube here. There you go. Lots of reverb for everybody. Or just a little bit of reverb for everybody. Or maybe we want more reverb just for the snare. There you go. And like I said, same for everything. So I can filter, function, and resonance. Gives me high resonance for everybody here. Function and filter type. There you go. Function and bit crush. It's like a global bit crush right now. Cool. By the way, the same thing works for the drum parameters, right? So if I hold function here and choose drum synth volume, I can adjust that. Right now we don't have any drum synth sounds sounding, but you get the idea, right? Be it the audio mixer or the drum mixer, all of these parameters can be viewed in this horizontal view where you get that parameter available to edit for all of the tracks simultaneously. Now, one little thing, shift and mixer gives you the modulation matrix for the mixer parameters. Note that in both vertical, which is the view that gives you per track all of the parameters, and the horizontal view, which gives you one parameter for all tracks, the values that are displayed are the initial values. Those parameters will be processed by the modulation matrix before being used for the drum synth or the mixer. So if you want to watch the modulation values themselves, you can simply hold the shift key while you're in any of these views. As you can see, I'm in vertical mixer view here. If I press shift now, the colors change. And if the pattern were playing and I had parameters changing over time, you would see these reflected in this page. Now the visualization will be stepped depending on the pattern content and in the modulation settings. In an empty track, for example, no modulation will be displayed because Tukra is not actually calculating those values. And the best time resolution of this display will happen with the tightest rolls or the microgrid filled up, because it's basically calculating per step. So even an LFO that's continuous, you're not going to be seeing a continuous up and down. You will only see how that is reflected and calculated per step. Clicking on any parameter while holding shift will show you the modulation matrix with that parameter already selected, ready for you to set the modulation amount and the modulation source. And again, we'll get to the modulation matrices very soon. Each pattern has an independent number of steps for every track, but the length of the first track is the one that defines the pattern length. The clock division setting of the first track will also affect the pattern length. So if track 1 has a length of 16 steps and a clock division of 2, the length of that pattern would actually turn out to be 32 steps. The pattern length will be the time that the pattern will be played within a part. So when you start now creating parts and songs, that's when that pattern length value becomes relevant, because that pattern will only play during that pattern length. When you're playing the pattern independently, you can have different lengths and things will start to cycle and change the way they sync up, and that can be very interesting, but it won't really work in a part or song. So if you're composing a song and you want that sort of polymetric thing going on with different lengths for different tracks, make sure that your first track is the longest one. You can also set the pattern to master track. That way, once the first track ends its cycle, all of the tracks will start at their starting points as well. They will reset. If not, the other tracks will continue playing where they were. When used inside a part or pattern chain, a pattern set to master track will always start playing its tracks on their starting point. Alright, thanks for watching. This has been part 1 of the Tukra Manual. There's still a lot of material to cover, so there will be more installments, probably 2 or 3 more. So stay tuned, hit the bell to get notified of future volumes to this tome. So that's it for now. See you soon, and stay noisy.